give a little bit of a presentation about a large question about rhyme, which is that as far as Chinese prosodic poetry writing is concerned, it still is done according to a rhyme system that was first established 1400 years ago. Present day, classical Chinese prosodic writing, prosodic poetry is still written according to a rhyme system that was first established 1400 years ago and finalized 800 years ago. So there's something sort of inappropriate about it, to the extent that in the process of historical evolution, sounds obviously have changed. But that system is still very much adhered to for various reasons. One, due to historical authority, and number two, given the large number of significant dialect groups in China, at least 5 or 6 of them, and Putumayo is only the largest of them, of course, constituting about 2/3 of the Chinese population in terms of native ability. So therefore, it is still adhered to as some kind of common platform, that people can communicate on. So that constitutes, therefore, a problem in terms of the very purpose of rhyme itself, because rhyme obviously is done for the sake of oral pleasure. You don't rhyme if you don't actually rhyme if you do not want to achieve that purpose. But of course, if you end up using correct sort of rhyme rules, but end up with poems that actually don't rhyme to the ear, then there is a logical problem. So the report that I had basically concerns this area. And then yesterday, before the presentation was terminated, due to sort of overrunning of time, there was a question raised about how Russian sort of rhymes in a different way. The way that we usually take rhyme is, I should have said it yesterday, is usually what we call end rhyme. Right? And obviously, I don't speak a dozen languages. I can only sort of read it academically from books. That various traditions actually, and this is something that I didn't have the time to talk about yesterday, and I guess I should supplement a little bit this morning, which is yes, different languages obviously would have slightly different rules about rhymes. And as I tried to sort of look up Russian last night a little bit, I read that for Russian rhymes also include a preceding consonant, a consonant that you have to share the same consonant preceding the main vowel and the consonants after them in order for it to be considered a rhyme in Russian. I don't know if my understanding is correct, but that seems to me to indicate what in Anglo-American tradition would call an identical rhyme. So for instance, gun rhymes with begun. But in Anglo-American poetry, for instance, a perfect rhyme, an identical rhyme, is actually considered a bad rhyme or an inferior. And I was told yesterday that in Russian you need the preceding consonant in order for rhyme to be considered. Now, I don't know, without getting into all the details, and I'm not sure that my understanding of the details is correct, I think it can be fairly said that there are certain rules about rhyme that are probably culturally and linguistically specific and involves aesthetic judgment that the Russian cannot say that the English has a wrong understanding no more than the English can say that the Russian has a wrong understanding. But I think that from a purely auditory point of view, we can probably say something like this. The reason why rhyme sort of ends up with a focus on the end rhyme, right? In other words, we can talk about various kinds of rhymes. There are various kinds of rhymes. Internal rhymes, for instance, right? Within the same line, you have two sounds identical. That's an internal rhyme. You can also have what we call a head rhyme, which is usually what we call alliteration. So, for instance, our and honor would be an alliteration. Right? For instance, he and her, that would be an alliteration, and technically you could call it a head rhyme. But the question remains, why most considerations of rhyme focus on end rhyme is a very simple one. Rhymes do not work if you read poetry silently. Right? Rhymes only achieve the oral pleasure if you read it aloud. And when you read things aloud, sounds superimpose one on the other. So in other words, if you achieve at the beginning of a rhyme, let's say, the first line you have he, and then the second line you have her, for instance. So then you can say that yes, these two lines begin with a head rhyme. But whatever rhyming effect that might have, it is not going to be very well heard, because once you articulate that first sound, the other sounds are superimposed on it. So the really really significant rhyming sounds, right, as we read poetry, has to be the end, because it is the end at the end of the line of the line. And so I guess that is basically why in most rhyming dictionaries you get this core definition, right? That for two lines to be considered as rhyme, you're basically dealing with maybe one, sometimes two, in very rare cases three, syllables, right? Where the sound resonance occurs between accented vowels, right, and all the rest of it that follows it. Right? So that is not to me an exclusive and an absolute definition of rhyme, but it seems to me from an auditory point of view, where sounds actually sort of move along in linear fashion and one sound superimposes itself on another until you reach the very end of the line. Right? That seems to me to be a fairly good objective reason to focus on the consideration of rhyme on any rhyme rather than any kind of rhyme, right? Because it offers the tyranny of the final impression, so to speak, from line to line. So I guess that can be a supplement, to what I talked about yesterday about rhyme, because obviously it's a very, very complicated matter, and sort of different languages have different kinds of rhyme. But to return, very briefly for 1 or 2 minutes to my own topic, what I was trying to say is that yes, on the one hand we have the authority, right, of a 1400-year-old sort of rhyme book that most people still follow, even though it is a long distance from their own sort of active dialect today, right? Particularly Putonghua. Particularly Putonghua, because Putonghua doesn't have, one of the 4 tonal categories of sounds, in those days. Principally, specifically, what I mean is the so-called Wu Sheng, entering tone sounds that end in PTK. So, if you're a native Putonghua speaker today, the language is very good for improving prose writing ability. That's my experience as a Southerner. But it is largely hopeless in the appreciation and the writing of modern prosodic Chinese, because one of the 4 tonal categories is gone. In fact, it had been gone since 700 years ago. When native Putonghua speakers write prosodic classical Chinese poetry today, they've got 2 choices. One, they stick to the old historical rhyme book structure, right, which have very little connection with their own native feel for the language, right? They can only kind of learn it academically, so to speak, without having a feel for it. Or they actually have constructed their own sets of rhymes according to Putonghua, right? But that system by itself is fairly inadequate and limited in terms of the sound resources. Right? And it also has fairly little meaning to native speakers of southern dialects ranging from Wu to Min or Xiang, in particular Yue, which together constitute over 20% of the Chinese population. Right? And to get an idea, I mean, even for my own sort of native dialect of Cantonese, when you're talking about Cantonese, the numbers do vary. But you're talking about a native Cantonese speaking population, let's say of around plus or minus about 80 million, right? And that, what size is that? That is roughly about the size of Korea. So you can say, within the Chinese context, it is a dialect, right? And very often, Cantonese or Min dialect or the Wu dialect, the distance from these dialects from Putonghua is very often, I know it is rough, right? But it has been, roughly compared to the distance between French and Spanish, right? And Italian, roughly of that order. So when we talk about these sort of dialectal things, it is not necessarily something that is localized. I guess the question that I want to really address for today is, how do you rhyme? What is the correct rhyming choice if you continue to write classical poetry today? If you write vernacular Chinese poetry, the problem doesn't exist, because vernacular Chinese poetry doesn't rhyme. It doesn't have to rhyme, that is. But classical prosodic poetry continues to rhyme, and rhyme is actually the earliest, the most enduring, and the most distinct attribute, in fact, of classical Chinese poetry. So there's no way in which you can write classical Chinese poetry without rhyming. So then the practical question is, how do you? Do you stick to the old rhyme books and end up with a 70% or 80%, rhyming sort of oral combination, right? Because many of the words that rhyme in the rhyme books do not rhyme today. And the degree in which they do not rhyme, they rhyme or do not rhyme, varies from dialect to dialect. For my native dialect, Cantonese, which is generally regarded to be the dialect that has preserved the most of the Middle Chinese phonological structure, I can stick to it and end up with roughly an 80% rhyming combination. So then if I pick up the other non-rhyming things and sort of read them out, reading out meaning not using mixed, right? Strictly speaking, not rhyming words in any given poem. I can continue to use another combination in another poem, right? But for me, the problem isn't a particularly a serious one. Let's put it this way. I can do some modification and it's fine with me, right? The percentage probably goes down to 70-ish for Southern Min, right? Maybe about 60% for native speaker of the Wu dialect and so on. So the general problem is we need to understand what we want to do if we want to continue to write rhyming Chinese poetry. I guess that's the issue that I really want to bring up. Do we stick to historical authority or do we revise it? But then if we revise it, how do we revise it? Right? Who is to revise it? Obviously not any single individual, right? Because here we have the weight of historical authority. Right? I mean, on whose order, on whose authority do you have, to revise the Chinese rhymes? Right? Things, unfortunately, in this world, things don't always work according to sheer rationality. All right? And there needs to be time for people to accept it, to digest it, and then to come together. And then there may be kind of negotiation among various groups that may be extra linguistic. So it's a very, very complicated issue. What I try to do in terms of a general direction is this. I mean, there's no way in which I can write a poem, for instance, that rhymes in every single major dialectal group, right? So that is not realistic, right? Given the fact that we have artificially accepted Putonghua as the official Chinese language, and it is on the fundamental premise that sound should never hurt meaning, right? That to me is an inviolable premise, right? If sound overtakes meaning, we should write a melody instead of a poem. So on that basis, what I try to do is this. If I can write a poem with ending rhymes, right, with end rhymes that rhyme in both Putonghua and my own native dialect, I would be very happy. And I think the same applies to any native speaker of any Southern dialect. Right? Min poet, for instance, the Southern Min poet from the Fujian province or native Taiwan, for instance, it shares the same native dialect. If that person can write a poem that rhymes in Fukkienese, Southern Min, for instance, right, and Putonghua, then I think that probably goes at this point, on an individual level at least, as far as being a near ideal solution. But definitely, I think there's a certain logical contradiction about writing a poem that rhymes according to the rhyme books, but that doesn't rhyme in reality. Right? Unfortunately, that continues to be done in all classical poetry competitions, and people, don't somehow have forgotten what's the purpose of rhyme in the very first place. Right? I guess I've overspoken my time.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwong.
Thank you.
Just be careful. That's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.